All right, Guy Christensen is an activist. He's a political commentator who in recent years has become one of the most visible creators on TikTok advocating for the Palestinian people amidst Israel's genocide in Gaza. He currently has 3.5 million followers on the platform, where he and other creators are increasingly seeing their Israel-critical views censored. He also has some impact in his real life that also strikes me as very un-American. We're going to try and talk to him to the extent he's able to talk, given ongoing lawsuits, and he joins us tonight, and I'm really excited to talk to him. Guy, thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm glad to be on.
Absolutely. All right, so for those who don't know you, and it was funny before the election, I used to talk to my staff a lot about how we have such a diffused world now of influence and fame and celebrity, where the people who are often the most famous among people under 30 or 35 are completely unknown to the professional media class. That's why you see the New York Times up the 2024 election running these profiles like, hey, there's this guy named Theo Von. Who is he? And hey, there seems to be this sensation involving a guy named Kai Cenat. And, you know, these are people who attract millions and millions of people. And I think that's the case for you as well. A huge following on TikTok, but I would guess most political junkies who are a little bit older aren't familiar with your story. So you're very young. You've obviously made the Palestinian cause and Israel's destruction of Gaza one of the main focal points of your activism and your commentary. Can you just talk us through a little bit about what your trajectory has been that brought you to being a political commentator on TikTok and why that issue has become so important to you?
Yeah, so I've been making videos on TikTok since I was 13 years old. I'm 19 years old now. And I didn't really do politics before October 7th. So it was about, 4 or 5 years of me making comedy videos, a little bit of political adjacent videos. But I garnered a platform on there of about 2 million followers. And all of a sudden on October 7th, my feed was flooded with pro-Israel propaganda, dehumanizing Palestinians, and me having no prior knowledge about Israel, I was shocked. I was disgusted by what I was hearing, not knowing anything. And that shock provoked me to dig into the reality of Gaza, which I, discovered it was an open-air prison far before Hamas crossed the border on October 7th. I, learned a little bit about the apartheid system, the brutal military occupation that Israel has had over the West Bank for the last 50 plus years. And I remember saying to myself, like, why do I have so many followers? Why do I have this platform, this influence, this privilege, if I'm not going to say something when I think I should? And, at the time, there was no pro-Palestinian voices that I knew of that I was seeing on my feeds or in the media. It was all the opposite. It was like, you remember the Harvard students getting doxxed on that truck going around campus because they signed simply a letter calling for a ceasefire on October 8th. And, Bill Ackman was saying they were going to be blacklisted, kicked out of college, never going to have a job. And I was looking at all this. And so it was a hard decision, but it ended up being the right one for sure. And so I've spoken out about Palestine with my platform ever since. We've reached hundreds of millions of people with our message about humanity. And this year alone, we raised over $500,000 and sent it all to Gaza, where we are running daily on the ground food distributions in multiple refugee camps across the territory.
What's really interesting about this, and I've thought about this a lot, especially in the last couple of years, is that as you get older, well, first of all, you're going to find that you become a person who starts sentences by saying, as you get older, and that's disturbing enough. But in addition to that, as you get older, you're going to start to realize that a lot of political conflicts that seem new are actually repeats of history. And, there's all kinds of cliches about repeating history. But a lot of times our political fights that seem really new in the moment are actually either based in the past or just you can find very similar, if not identical, conflicts in the past. And as somebody who has been a critic of Israel for so long, what's fascinating me about the last couple of years is that we haven't really had Israel and the U.S. relationship to it on the front burner of American politics, probably since at least 2014, which is, Israel bombs Gaza every year, but that was the last time Israel bombed it on a massive scale. No one near what they did this time, but still massive enough that people were paying attention. But that's a long time. That's a decade. It's like a lifetime in politics. Didn't really nearly last as long. And so while a lot of people like me and in my age group are very seeped in Israel and understand it. I know that for people in your generation and even older, this is like the first time you're really getting a look at the true face of Israel, but also the true face of the U.S. relationship to Israel. What is it that kind of surprised you or shocked you to the extent that you prioritize this issue? Like, what was it about this as opposed to all the other injustices and suffering in the world?
Well, I think there's two things. Right after I'd begun my research into the true nature of the Palestinian struggle for liberation, I saw parallels, as you were talking about, things repeat across history with, the idea, the Zionist idea of a greater Israel and, America's manifest destiny and, the colonization and genocide of the Native American people here. And that was actually one of the first videos, if not the first video I made talking about Gaza. During that initial period of learning. And I think that what I've come to learn, and it's not shocking anymore, but as I've paid close attention to the actions of our elected officials, the actions of those in the executive, the power brokers and institutions in this country, is that following October 7th, I swear they spent about 6 to 8 months exclusively working to further Israel's interests. All the discourse online, all the votes in Congress to redefine anti-Semitism, or to ban TikTok, or to enshrine certain definitions across the political levels in this country. It is really honestly disgusting because it was my first, as you said, confrontation with the nature of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And prior I believed naively that our elected officials were supposed to serve us, and learning about AIPAC. And, they're not the only, as we know, not the only pro-Israel lobby. It's an extensive network of billionaires and, registered lobbying organizations and, foreign agents in the United States all working to fund our elected officials. But seeing them in 2024, just a few months after I was introduced to all this, blow $100 million. AIPAC blew $100 million. The pro-Israel interests spent at least $250 million, and they bought a super majority of the seats in our Congress. All of this was shocking, and I realized how important it is to counter Zionist influence in this country, who are buying and taking away our representation in government. And so that's why I've focused so hard on this. I think it's not only important in terms of getting in touch with our humanity and standing up for our brothers and sisters who are being killed with our tax dollars, but also in terms of trying to make possible real change in this country.
You had said this is kind of your first introduction into this issue, and you talked about some of the incredible exertions of corporate and financial and political power wielded at the very beginning, almost to signal to people, look, if you want to have a career, if you're a young person and you're thinking about opposing Israel, you better think twice. And, we interviewed those Harvard students at the very beginning, whose faces were plastered all over Harvard, paid for by very wealthy Israel interests, trying to, permanently ruin not just their standing in school, but their careers before it even got started. And I remember asking them, like, whether you expected this kind of level of attacks or not, do you kind of regret it? Like, you're at Harvard. I know that means, I know a lot of people went to Harvard, that you're hyper competitive in your career. You're hyper competitive in your academics. You've just been told that entire industries, big law firms, hedge funds, those are going to be cut off to you as a result of this blacklist Bill Ackman and others are keeping. Do you regret it? And they immediately said, not even in the slightest. Like, I wouldn't even feel that I could look at myself in the mirror if I hadn't done this. When you started talking about this issue, because I can tell you that for decades, this is what has changed so much, the bipartisan control of Israel discourse was so great that everybody understood that you were either going to suffer career destruction and reputational destruction, or come very close to it if you decided to speak out about Israel. There's countless examples of people who did that and then got destroyed, which of course makes it less likely others will. Did you have a feel, as somebody who came to this new, as to kind of what you might be unleashing against yourself, especially given the size of your platform?
Yeah, that was the main question. I was 17. I was a senior in high school. when all this started happening in the world and in my life. And looking at that specific story about the Harvard students, I remember thinking to myself, if I do this, I'm opening myself up to all the attacks that they're facing. And I at the time, I'm about to wrap up my high school education and go on to hopefully college. And I was definitely thinking that they might kick me out of college for this one day for simply speaking up.
All right, so that turned out to be quite prescient, given that, and I know you had mentioned to me, and I told you I was a litigator and a lawyer in a previous life, so I understand fully that there's litigation around this question, so you're restricted in what you can say. I know your lawyers will kill you if you say too much. So I want to just ask you about it and talk about it however you can, to whatever extent you're comfortable doing it. So this is obviously, you've been attracting a lot of attention for a while. I've seen you in places. I've seen your influence growing. I think you were on Breaking Points, who were hosted by my friends, and I remember seeing you on there, and I think I watched some of it. So you've obviously been attracting a lot of attention. But the real, and my guess is there had to have been people waiting for you to do something that could have given them a kind of a hook into really trying to attack you, given the size of the platform that you have on TikTok and how outspoken you've been against Israel. And there was this incident at the Israeli embassy, I think it was in June, something like that, when two Israeli staffers at the Israeli embassy were gunned down in the streets of Washington. You posted about it, originally saying, of course, you abhor the violence, you don't support killing of civilians, kind of rethought it, decided they weren't entirely civilians, they were diplomats with a government committing a genocide. Maybe there's some justification to it, all of which is constitutionally protected speech. And those posts kind of gave your critics a way to start pressuring Ohio State to take action against you and punishing you, and they proceeded to do that. What can you tell us about that whole incident, where things are with it, if you can tell us about anything?
Bear with me as I think about what exactly I'm allowed to say. But the ACLU is representing my case right now. Shout out to them, defenders of free speech in this country. And I want to make it clear that I am a nonviolent person. I don't commit violence. I don't incite violence with my platform. And I've never, ever said anything, posted any video, shared any message that goes towards that end of violence. I'm not encouraging of that. It would ruin my platform, obviously, in the way that they've tried to, paint me as this violent individual who's like a jihadi terrorist, a sleeper cell in the United States, influencing young Americans to follow these violent steps. So now that we've got that aside, I do want to mention that around the time when all this happened in the spring, I had launched this campaign. I actually went on what ended up being a 6-day hunger strike of my own, and raising money off of that and the viral videos to launch our campaign on the ground in Gaza, which I mentioned previously, doing daily food distributions inside of refugee camps in a humane manner, not unlike these GHF death camps run by Israel and mercenaries from the United States. This campaign was gaining a lot of traction. And so I think it's not a coincidence that they took that moment as the opportune one to go after me and smear me with all these accusations, like in the New York Post, the Times of Israel, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post. Every single Zionist outlet in the United States, every single Israeli news outlet overseas, all posted the same story the same week about me, smearing me and trying to generate a harassment attack against me to throw me off of what I believe could have been even bigger than what we made it, distributing food to Gaza and raising awareness about the, it was 3 months of total starvation of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip by Israel.
Yeah, and I just let me ask you before I move on to something else, just on this case, and to the extent that you can again. I mean, according to the ACLU releases, according to news articles about your story, and it's got to be weird having massive numbers of media outlets from, not just the United States, but around the world attacking you in such vicious ways when you're 18 years old, 19 years old, a freshman in college. It's kind of indicative of how desperate they are, especially when it comes to young Americans, to destroy any space to criticize Israel. But your school the Ohio State did in fact take action against you for those posts, right? And you do currently have either your enrollment suspended or actually expelled. Is that accurate based on, and if you can't talk much about it, of course I understand.
Yeah, that is accurate. I was an Ohio State University student, and they expelled me under pressure from various Zionist groups, forces, and including people in our government. Richie Torres, Pam Bondi are some names that were involved during this time. And they all kind of came together at the same time this smear campaign was being launched to get me kicked out of their school, which they folded and violated. In the case, what the public filing says is they violate, and it's true, they violated my First Amendment right and my right to due process.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I don't know how much you followed it, but during the Biden administration, and I think you might have heard me say this when you were waiting, one of the biggest grievances, and I'm somebody who, as a lawyer, I became a lawyer in part because I was inspired by the ACLU. I did a lot of free speech cases. I'm a big free speech proponent as a journalist. And I agreed with the American right entirely on this, that there was a huge controversy because the U.S. government was picking up the phone under the Biden administration, calling Facebook, calling Google, other social media platforms, demanding they censor and remove people who were expressing dissent on COVID, on Ukraine, on the 2020 election. And the idea that the U.S. government could censor private actors to punish people who were critics was such an offensive idea under the First Amendment. And now here you have members of the Trump administration. I mean, Pam Bondi's the Attorney General. Richie Torres is a member of Congress, calling your school publicly, privately, and demanding that you be punished, not for any crimes, not for anything remotely criminal in what you said, constitutionally protected speech, but because they dislike the content. It kind of as the silence of those same people in the conservative movement to object to that is sort of deafening. Guy, can I ask you, again, as somebody who's been watching this for a long time, one of the things that I think has shocked a lot of people, and I had Norman Finkelstein on my show, I think a month ago, maybe a little longer. He's been obviously an outspoken Israel critic. He suffered professionally. Alan Dershowitz got his tenure offer removed because of Israel criticism. And he's been a voice of kind of gloom and doom for a long time, sort of like, look, Israel controls the United States. We're totally bankrupt and corrupt on this issue. And he even says, and he's as gloomy as it gets, that he kind of, for the first time in a long time, sees a cause of optimism. John Mearsheimer, who's also on our show a lot, he wrote the pioneering book, The Israel Lobby, in 2006, was, attacked more than I can describe, says the same thing, that look, no matter how bad things are, the major change here that's a cause for optimism is that people in your generation have turned against Israel, are questioning all of these issues openly and without fear for the first time for as long as anybody can remember. And that's certainly my view as well. Why is that happening? I mean, given all the ways that they can punish you and destroy you, they've shown not just their ability, but their willingness to do that. Why has this become really the issue of your generation?
Well, I think that number one, for the first time ever, social media has been used by most of the people in the world, where when Israel commits these crimes, they're documented. The footage is posted on social media platforms, like especially TikTok. And young Americans who use these platforms are seeing them and recognizing that what they're seeing is criminal, it's evil, and they should be opposed to that by their nature of being a human being. And I also think that it's because Zionism from the very beginning has the seeds of its own destruction within it. You can't take someone's land and spend the next 100 years denying their rights to return, self-determine, destroying their governments, putting them under occupation, apartheid, the whole 9 yards, and expect that the world is going to support something like that. No oppressive ideology, no ethno-state or wannabe ethnocracy like Israel has ever lasted permanently, as we saw the collapse of Nazi Germany, apartheid in South Africa, Rhodesia as well. It's an untenable, it's an unwinnable proposition.
One of the critiques, I think, of activism from young people, and this goes, there's a long history very rambunctious, sometimes even civil disobedience-driven activism on the part of young people your age, college age, students going back to the civil rights movement in Vietnam and the apartheid regime in South Africa of the 80s. People act like the protest movement in 2024 was some unique deviation from the American tradition, when in fact it was an expression of it. But oftentimes, even going back then, there's this patronizing idea that young people who question American foreign policy are thinking in very overly emotional, not very educated and informed ways about the issues that they're focused on. It's kind of an automatic reflexive empathy that's very unsophisticated, doesn't have a lot of historical context to it. What have you done to inform yourself on what is, no matter what your view is, a long and complex history in this region between two people? I don't mean what's happening in Gaza is complex, but I mean the history is complex, and it's important to understand for analyzing today. Well, what kind of things have you done as somebody who came to this without much knowledge to make sure that you're informed when you're talking to millions of people?
Well, I was careful not to, speak with much authority when I was first starting out, and I was, reading human rights reports, looking over, the factual history of the conflict and the struggle. And then I started diving into, the literature by the new historians out of Israel, reading Rashid Khalidi, tapping into all the news reporting about the ongoing and unfolding events in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. My bookshelf over there is filled with books all on this topic, which I've studied, and there's notes all throughout. It's important that, we're informed about this. And I guess what you were saying about the criticism that young people are just speaking out of, our, naive, foolish, emotional hearts, is untrue, because I believe we're the ones who are the most tapped in with the real news, the real side of the story, versus all this baseless Zionist propaganda that's on Fox and CNN that is given to the rest of the older adult population in the United States. We're hearing the actual truth about Israel's actions. We're hearing the truth about their history, unlike other segments of the population. And so I think that while I'm not saying that we're the most knowledgeable overall about foreign policy and geopolitics and the history of Israel and Palestine, but I think you have to give the young generation, Gen Z and millennials, a lot of credit here for being the ones who have pushed this student movement, these campus protests, despite repression under the Biden administration, who arrested 3,300 of our students and our academics on our campuses to suppress us, while making threats in the media and on the Senate floor. We stood up against this, and I think it was a big mistake that in 2020, the Democrats aligned with the popular protest movement at that time, the Black Lives Matter movement, but they did not take the same opportunity in 2024 to align with the popular pro-Palestinian movement, and it ended up crippling them, undermining Harris's chances to win election. Although there was a lot of problems, I would say that there's a polling that came out before and after the election, but the one I'm talking about was after, where they asked 19 million Americans. They polled this group of people who voted blue in 2020 but chose not to vote blue in 2024. So they either voted for Trump, third party, or did not vote. And their number one issue over the border, inflation, healthcare, number one issue for them was Gaza. They were upset with the Democrats' policy on Gaza. And, that would have swung most, if not all, of the swing states for Harris.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the Black Lives Matter movement and the Democrat support for it will be seen, especially with more time. It's kind of an easy thing for Democrats. The Black Lives Matter movement ended up not really being a threat to power centers. The Democratic Party obviously has a big black activist base, how much it depends. It kind of didn't have a choice. Whereas the Israel issue is something that has been much more of a third rail for Democratic Party politics, given who their funders are. And that is about the distribution of power. That is about foreign policy and arms dealers and kind of everything that lies at the heart of imperial America. And so I think that was a much harder decision. I think as much as seeing the true face of Israel, a lot of people like you saw the true face of the Democratic Party. All right, let me ask you, you said, which I agree with, look, on some ways, even though we're young, we're more informed. We haven't been imprisoned by Sean Hannity and Fox News and CBS News. We get information from a lot of different sources. In fact, we get to hear directly from people in Gaza, from Western doctors and organizations that have visited Gaza. We don't just hear from Benjamin Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham. We hear from a lot more diverse range of voices, and that is because of the internet and social media. It's one of the reasons why I've made a free internet and free speech on the internet one of probably my central cause over the past years, precisely because it allows a citizenry that's informed. And that is conversely what makes this crackdown on the freedom of information and free speech on platforms like TikTok so incredibly alarming and dangerous. Is it can transform the internet from this place of liberation and free information into this weapon of unprecedented control if you put it in the hands of a small number of people who want to manage information for a particular political agenda. That's clearly what happened with Larry Ellison, with CBS, and now with TikTok. Talk about, and I don't even think the deal with TikTok is completely yet, although they've been doing a lot to kind of placate the U.S. government in order to stay, knowing that they had to. What have been some of the changes that you've seen? You do have the former IDF soldier in charge of censorship. You obviously have these political pressures. TikTok knows who's coming in and what their goals are with the platform. What have you seen in terms of changes in free speech in general and with Israel in particular?
Yeah, so I know you talked about her, Erica Mindell, former IDF soldier, former State Department contractor. She's documented saying a few years ago that it's her number one goal to destroy the BDS movement. That's her words. And so, you know, like you said, the ADL lobbied social media platforms like TikTok and successfully placed her as the head of the hate speech policy and enforcement. And this was on August 13th of this year. The following day, the TikTok pushed out an in-app pop-up for all of its users, explaining that in 1 month's time, they would be changing their free speech guidelines. And as I saw this and I thought to myself, this is definitely going to serve, the Zionist narrative. And, lo and behold, September 13th rolls around 1 month later, and in this new free speech update, they transform their hate speech policy. They mandate that people have to condemn terrorist groups designated by the U.S. State Department when mentioned in any videos, even when mentioned in a neutral, reportive, investigative context. They opened the door to classifying anti-Israel speech as hate speech. Based on their new clause about national origin. They ban the reading of manifestos. They restrict videos from the feed that show videos from war, aka Gaza. And so I've been forced, and other people have been forced, to stop showing real footage, real imagery from the destruction of the Palestinian in the Gaza Strip. And so, as soon as these changes went into effect, my videos started getting banned or removed from the recommendation feed left and right. And to kind of put this into perspective, over the last, almost 2 years before these changes, as I was posting consistently about Palestine every single day, there's only been a handful of videos that I've ever gotten removed. And I looked, and over the last, year prior to September 13th, there was 1 or 2 that you could even count. And so very quickly, I racked up about 10 violations, either, removed completely without any recourse to appeal, or, they were either shadow banned. They would get like 100 views from people who only went directly to my profile to view it. And my fellow collaborators, fellow people in the movement on TikTok, I reached out to them and they reported back the same exact thing. I know you showed that Crystal Ball was being censored. I didn't know that. It's insane to me. And, we also believe that more than what they explicitly tell us when they take down or delete our videos or shadow ban it, is that they're doing this secretly and suppressing our views across the board when we talk about certain topics. And there's certain topics that are particularly sensitive under this new free speech regime. It's talking about Charlie Kirk and Israel. Every single video where I've spoken about those two issues connected to each other, I've had them entirely deleted off the platform immediately. When you talk about Palantir, when you talk about AIPAC and their influence over our government, or when you talk about Larry Ellison. Now, this happened, these changes came in effect about halfway into September, and by the end of September, Trump had announced for the first time that Larry Ellison was poised to take control of Americans' TikTok. And, Netanyahu, again, at the end of September, met with what was the next batch of paid American influencers by the State of Israel's Hasbara budget, which I think has about 190 million in total this year for their budget to pay people to post Zionist propaganda. These are the people who were getting paid $7,000 a post. He met with them in America when he was visiting Donald Trump. And, this is recorded. He is talking to them about their strategy of this eighth front of the war on the Americans' discourse about Israel. And he says that the number one most important thing happening for Israel's narrative right now is the sale of TikTok. Number one, he says, he repeats it, making it very clear that his buddy, Larry Ellison, who once offered him a board seat at his company, Oracle, that's number one donor to the IDF, that, lets Netanyahu vacation on the island he owns in Hawaii, that has data centers underground in Israel that process and store their surveillance data on Palestinians, that fuel their apartheid system and their AI killing machines, that is the most important thing that is about to happen for Israel. And what that tells us is that Larry Ellison, the reason he is taking control of TikTok and he's buying it is for Israel. It's for Netanyahu. It's to protect their narrative. And it's frightening, because this is aided and facilitated by the Trump regime, who is obviously under the thumb of other MAGA Zionist billionaires like Miriam Adelson, and of course Larry Ellison, who's always at the White House.
All right, I have a very important breaking news flash for you, which is that the holidays will be here before you know it. I mean, they're going to be here before you know it. And that means that for many families, it's excitement, a little stress between gifts, travel, and higher prices. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially if you're already relying on credit cards to cover the basics. If that debt is piling up, you're not alone. If you're a homeowner, you might have considered reaching out to American Financing, but hesitated because you don't want to give up your low mortgage rate. That's why America Finance created the Smart Equity Loan, a simple, smart way to get your finances back on track without giving up your low mortgage rate. Unlike a HELOC, which can fluctuate with the market, the Smart Equity Loan offers a fixed rate. So you'll have one predictable monthly payment and lets you use your home equity to pay off high interest debt, free up your cash flow, and still keep your existing mortgage intact. There are no upfront fees. To find out if you qualify, 866-889-9994. That's 866-889-9994, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Greenwald. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.